They slammed him against the hood of his own car, in front of his child, in his own driveway, all because they didn't see a father, only the color of his skin. Officers Strong and Kramer didn't ask questions. They acted on assumption, never realizing they were detaining the chief of state police. But when his badge fell open and the truth stared them in the face, everything changed. Just wait until you see how this shocking encounter turned into a fight for justice, and why it ended the way no one expected.
It was one of those southern June evenings when the air hangs heavy and golden, the cicadas humming like a low chorus from the treetops. The sun hadn't quite dipped below the rooftops yet, casting a soft orange glow over the quiet streets of suburban Tallahassee. Melvin Douglas, a tall man in his early 50s with graying temples and a presence that carried both calm and command, pulled into his driveway at the end of a cul-de-sac. His black Ford Explorer eased to a stop. In the back seat sat a crumpled little jersey, its sleeves stained with clay. A child's baseball glove lay on the front seat beside a pair of tiny cleats. Next to Melvin in the passenger seat was his son, 5-year-old Kaiden, still brimming with energy from practice. His cheeks were flushed, eyes bright, a smudge of dirt on his chin. As soon as the car parked, Kaiden bounded out of the door with the freedom only children know, pretending to chase down a pop fly in the driveway. Melvin stayed back a moment, taking a deep breath behind the wheel before stepping out. He didn't wear a uniform. No gun, no badge, just a dark gray hoodie, jeans, and sneakers. To anyone watching, he looked like any other black father coming home with his child. And that, he knew, was sometimes all it took. Melvin had spent decades teaching himself composure, not just because of the job, but because of what came with being who he was, in a world that still made quick judgments. He believed in control, in grace under fire. He lived by it. Sometimes that was harder than anything else. He opened the trunk to grab Kaiden's bag. That's when it happened. A police cruiser came to an abrupt stop just across the street, tires screeching as if they'd just pulled off a pursuit. 2 white officers jumped out. One younger, buzz-cut, aggressive in his stride, Patrolman Michael Strong. The other, older, broader, with a deep crease between his brows, Lieutenant Charlie Kramer. They didn't ask questions, they barked commands. "Hey, you, next to the SUV, step away from the child." Melvin turned, calmly but slowly, holding nothing but a mesh bag of baseball gear in his hand. "That's my son," he said evenly. "We just got back from practice." "Step away from the vehicle," Strong shouted again. "Hands where I can see 'em. Let me see your ID, now." Melvin blinked, heart sinking, but voice steady. "Sir," he began, "you're making a mistake. Before the sentence finished, Strong had closed the distance and shoved him toward the front of the car. Melvin caught himself against the hood. Kaiden screamed. "Daddy, what are they doing?" Melvin didn't move, not out of fear, but because he understood the danger of escalation. Any sudden motion, any tension could put his child at risk. He turned his head just enough to say, "It's okay, buddy, stay right there." But it wasn't okay. Lieutenant Kramer pressed an arm across his back. Strong grabbed at Melvin's wallet, yanked it free from his jeans. Melvin said nothing, just breathed. Kaiden cried, frozen in place, his glove dropped on the sidewalk. From across the street, a porch light flickered on. Miss Hazel, an elderly neighbor with silver hair tied in a bun, stood from her rocking chair. Her phone was already recording. "Oh my God," she muttered, voice trembling. "That's Melvin. That's Chief Douglas. What in the world are they doing?" Strong flipped open the wallet and paused. There it was, a hard leather badge case worn from years of service. Inside, a gold insignia reflected the evening light. Chief Melvin Douglas, State Police of Florida. Strong's face went pale. Kramer loosened his grip. Both men exchanged glances, confused, stunned. "You've got to be kidding me," Strong muttered under his breath. Melvin straightened slowly, eyes never leaving his son, who stood there with wide, tear-filled eyes. He knelt beside Kaiden and picked up the little glove, placing it gently back in the boy's hand. Then, and only then, he turned to face the two officers. He didn't shout, he didn't threaten, he didn't raise a hand. He simply looked at them. And in that moment, the silence spoke louder than anything they'd said. A silence that said, "You didn't see a man, you saw a target." A silence that asked, "What if I hadn't had that badge?" A silence that knew, this wasn't new, it was just recorded. Miss Hazel's phone kept rolling. Across the street, a curtain shifted, another neighbor peered out, and within minutes, the footage began its spread, from group chats to timelines to newsrooms. The story had only just begun. It was one of those southern summer evenings in Tallahassee when the sky burned gold and the air sat still, soaked in heat and stillness. Melvin Douglas drove slowly down his quiet suburban street, his 5-year-old son Kaiden humming in the back seat. A little baseball glove and a pair of grass-stained cleats sat on the passenger seat while a crumpled practice jersey clung to the floor mat.
It had been a good day, the kind of normal, everyday joy that fathers tucked into their memory without realizing how precious it really was. Melvin parked the black Ford Explorer at the curb in front of his home. He stepped out calmly, dressed in jeans and a gray pullover, not in uniform, no badge in sight. Just a father bringing his boy home from practice. He opened the trunk to grab Kaiden's gear as the boy ran in circles around the car, pretending to catch fly balls, giggling. Then, the screech of tires. A police cruiser jerked to a stop just across the street. 2 white officers jumped out with hurried aggression. One was young, intense, and sharp-voiced, Patrolman Michael Strong. The other, older, with deeper lines in his face, Lieutenant Charlie Kramer. "Hey, you!" Strong barked. "Black SUV, step away from the child. Hands where we can see him." Melvin turned slowly, sensing the cold wall of assumption descending. He had no weapon, no radio, no badge clipped to his belt. To them, he was just a tall, black man near a vehicle and a child, nothing more. "That's my son," he replied, calm and even. "We just came back from baseball practice." "Let's see your ID, now! Hands on the hood!" Strong barked again, already stepping forward. Melvin exhaled, lips barely parting. "Sir, I believe you're making a He didn't get to finish. Strong shoved him forward. Kramer followed close, gripping his shoulder, pressing him onto the hood of his own vehicle. His cheek struck hot metal. His son screamed. "Daddy, what are they doing?" Kaiden's glove hit the ground. His voice cracked with confusion and fear. Melvin stayed still. Not because he feared the officers, but because he feared what might happen if he resisted, and what that would mean for his son. Every instinct told him to speak, to stand, but he didn't move. He just breathed, deep and controlled. "Get your hands off my dad!" Kaiden yelled, tears streaming down his face. Across the street, a front porch light clicked on. Miss Hazel, the elderly woman who'd lived there for decades, stood up from her rocker. She squinted, recognized the voice, and quickly reached for her phone. Her voice trembled as she whispered to herself, "That's Melvin. That's Chief Douglas." Strong fished into Melvin's back pocket and pulled out his wallet. He flipped it open without care. Then, silence. Inside the badge case, clear as day, was a golden insignia gleaming in the dusk. Chief Melvin Douglas, State Police of Florida. Strong's face drained of color. Kramer froze mid-motion. They looked at each other, stunned. Then at the man they'd just pinned to the hood. "Oh no," one of them murmured. Melvin slowly rose to his feet, brushed the dust from his sleeves, and turned, not to them, but to his son. He knelt, picked up the small glove, and placed it back in Kaiden's hand. Then he looked up. His eyes met the 2 officers, not with rage, but with a depth of disappointment no apology could erase. Across the street, Miss Hazel's phone kept recording. Within minutes, the video would begin to circulate. Within hours, it would be trending. By the next morning, it would be everywhere. News anchors across the country repeated the same headline.
State Police Chief pinned to asphalt by his own officers, mistaken identity or racial bias. The footage exploded, 11 million views in the first 24 hours. The governor's office issued a terse statement. A special review panel was formed. Tensions rose. But Melvin, he didn't go on television. He didn't do interviews. He didn't hire a lawyer. Instead, he walked into the state police headquarters alone. No uniform, no escort, and sat across the table from the two men who had mistaken him for something less than who he was. "You know who I am now," he said quietly. "But yesterday, you didn't see that. You didn't see the chief. You didn't see a father. You saw a target." Strong shifted, as if preparing to speak, but Melvin raised a hand, not to command, but to ask for silence. "I've served in Iraq, led counter-terror operations, carried lives in my hands, but nothing was harder than watching my son cry while strangers treated me like a suspect in my own front yard." Kramer lowered his eyes. I was wrong." Melvin didn't flinch. "Being wrong is forgetting a coffee order. What you did was more. You didn't just detain a man, you created fear in a child who trusted you to protect him." The room stayed quiet. Nothing more needed to be said. The next day, Melvin stood before the press. Not in uniform, he held it, neatly folded in his arms. The air was thick with microphones and questions. "This uniform," he said, lifting the fabric slightly, "doesn't make you more important. It makes you more accountable." The crowd quieted. "If you wear this and you forget to see people, you failed."
I'm not filing lawsuits, I'm calling for reform. Every car equipped with cameras, every officer trained in racial perception, every department reviewed and held accountable. And if you can't respect the weight of the badge, you shouldn't wear it. There was no anger in his tone, only clarity and power. The crowd erupted in applause. Headlines shifted. Calm justice. State police chief calls for reform, not revenge. 6 months later, Kaiden no longer looked away when a patrol car drove by. He wore his baseball uniform again, glove in hand, and smiled when his dad walked him to practice. Melvin became a quiet symbol of change, not because he demanded it with force, but because he stood for it with truth. And from that single moment, when his face hit the hood and the world turned to look, came something greater than outrage. It became the beginning of something better, a lesson not just in pain, but in purpose.